He laughed at him in front of everybody, in front of the teachers who had known this boy for 2 years, in front of the parents, in front of the district superintendent, the woman who, before this evening was over, would end his career. She just didn't know it yet. He laughed at a 12-year-old boy. And the child, this small, quiet child in a white t-shirt and navy sneakers, didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't look away. He just stood there, in the center of that stage, in front of 400 people, and he absorbed it with the kind of stillness that only comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. I need you to understand something before this story begins. Nobody in that auditorium, not the teachers, not the parents, not the board members in the third row, nobody knew what this boy was carrying, because his grandmother had asked that it stay private. Because she believed her grandson deserved the right to simply be a child before the world decided what to make of him. That ends tonight. His name is Marcus. He is 12 years old. He is black. He is autistic. And he is, though the man laughing at him does not know this yet, could not imagine this in his worst nightmare. He is the second-ranked junior mathematician in the entire United States of America. The principal's name was Harold Beckett. This is the story of the 63 days between his first laugh and his last day. But to understand why that moment mattered, to truly feel the weight of it, the way the teachers felt it, the way the parents felt it, the way the 437 students felt it, you have to go back. You have to go back to a Tuesday morning in September, to a small row house on Clover Street, where a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Jerome Williams was eating oatmeal and counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. Marcus woke up every morning at 6:17, not because an alarm told him to, not because his grandmother shook him awake. 6:17 every single morning, because that was the exact moment in autumn when the first shaft of natural light came through the gap in his bedroom curtains and landed on the third rung of his bookshelf, the one that held his binders. 14 binders, each one color-coded, each one filled with handwritten mathematical sequences that Marcus had been building since he was 7 years old. Sequences that his teachers didn't fully understand. Sequences that one professor at a university he'd never visited had described, in a letter his grandmother kept folded in her Bible, as genuinely unprecedented in a pre-adolescent mind. Marcus didn't know about the letter. He just liked the numbers. He was 12 years old, 4 feet 10 inches tall, with a face that his grandmother, Rose Williams, everyone called her Nana Rose, described as an old soul wrapped in a young boy. He had close-cropped hair, large brown eyes that moved quickly and observed everything, and a habit of pressing his fingertips together when he was thinking, which was almost always. He wore the same style of clothing most days, a clean white t-shirt, dark jeans with no belt loops because belt loops bothered him, and a pair of navy blue New Balance sneakers that his Nana Rose replaced every 6 months because Marcus wore through the right toe first from how he sat at his desk. He was autistic, his teachers knew it, the school knew it. His IEP, his individualized education program, was 12 pages long, revised every year, and had been built with tremendous care by a woman named Ms. Patricia Acaffer, who had been Marcus's homeroom teacher since 6th grade, and who, frankly, would have gone to war for that boy without blinking. What most people at Jefferson Middle School didn't know about Marcus, what had never come up in an IEP meeting, what had never been listed on a report card, what his Nana Rose had quietly, carefully kept private, was the rest of it. The competitions, the awards, the letters, but we'll get to that. On that Tuesday morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Nana Rose moved behind him, the sounds of the kitchen familiar and soothing, the low hiss of the kettle, the soft shuffle of her house slippers on linoleum, the faint gospel music from the small radio she kept on top of the refrigerator. The kitchen smelled like oatmeal and brown sugar, and the specific floral soap Nana Rose had been using since before Marcus was born. "You eat that oatmeal or you staring at it?" she said, not turning around. Marcus glanced down at his bowl. "I was counting. Counting what?" "The oats," he paused. "There are approximately 412 of them. I stopped at 391 because the distribution curve gets complicated on the edges." Nana Rose set down her coffee mug and turned around. She looked at her grandson for a long moment, This boy she had raised since he was 3 years old, since her daughter, his mother, had gotten sick. Since the world had handed her a grief she hadn't asked for, and a joy she hadn't expected. She looked at Marcus and she felt what she always felt, a love so wide it had no edges she could find. "Baby," she said, "eat the oatmeal." Marcus ate the oatmeal. He had no father in the picture, hadn't since before he could form a memory of one. What he had instead was a grandmother who worked 2 days a week at the church office and spent the other 5 days making sure that Marcus had everything he needed, the quiet he craved, the routine that kept him grounded, the late nights at the kitchen table when numbers wouldn't leave his brain alone, and Nana Rose would sit across from him with her decaf tea and her crossword puzzle, not saying much, just being there. Just being the steady, immovable fact of herself. She had fought for Marcus his entire life. Fought with the elementary school when they wanted to put him in a self-contained classroom without trying anything else first. Fought with the insurance company over therapy appointments. Fought with neighbors who stared too long. Fought with herself in the quiet hours before dawn when she wondered if she was doing enough, being enough, giving him enough of the world. She always got up the next morning and tried again. Marcus didn't talk about feelings in the conventional way. But every night before bed, he said the same thing to his grandmother, had said it since he was 5 years old in the same flat, certain tone he used for everything. Nana. Today was a good day, whether it had been or hadn't been. He said it because he meant it as a promise more than a report. Tomorrow I'll make it a good day. That's who Marcus Williams was. Jefferson Middle School sat on the corner of Albemarle Avenue and 5th Street in Crestwood, Ohio, a mid-sized city where the skyline was modest and the neighborhoods were layered with history. The school had been named after a president whose relationship with Black Americans was complicated at best, a fact that the Parent-Teacher Association had been trying to get the district to address for 3 years without success. The student body was about 68% Black, 20% Latino, and 12% everything else. The teachers, the good ones, and there were many good ones, had been there for years. Ms. Patricia Aucaffer, originally from Lagos by way of Columbus, had been teaching 6th and 7th grade math at Jefferson for 11 years. She was 41, brilliant, funny in a dry, unhurried way, and deeply, completely committed to her students. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept a collection of miniature African sculptures on her windowsill. She had discovered Marcus's abilities in the first week of 6th grade. When she'd written a multiplication problem on the board, a 2-digit by 3-digit multiplication exercise for warm-up, and Marcus had given her the answer before she finished writing the second number. She thought it was a coincidence at first. Then she tried a harder one, then harder. Then she went home that Friday evening and sat in her car in her driveway for a full 10 minutes just thinking. She was thinking about what she'd just seen. She was thinking about what it meant. And she was thinking with the specific, uncomfortable weight of a teacher who has just realized something profound, that if the wrong person ever found out about this child's abilities before he was ready, before his family was ready, before the world had been properly introduced to who he truly was, it could go very badly. She had no way of knowing, sitting in that car on a Friday evening in September, that in 13 months the wrong person would find out, and that it would go exactly as badly as she feared. By October of that year, she had reached out to Dr. Lydia Chambers at the University Extension Program, a specialist in mathematical giftedness. By November, Marcus was being quietly, privately assessed. By January, Dr. Chambers had used the phrase once in a generation. By February, Nana Rose had read the letter, folded it, placed it in her Bible, and asked Ms. Aucaffer very quietly if they could keep this between themselves for now. "I don't want anyone making Marcus into a spectacle," Nana Rose had said. "He's a child. He needs to just be a child first." Ms. Aucaffer had agreed completely. For 18 months, that agreement had held. Jefferson's special education department was small but dedicated. 2 full-time special ed teachers, a part-time speech therapist, and a behavioral support coordinator named Mr. Davis, who had a gift for making anxious kids feel safe. Marcus worked with this team and with Ms. Aucaffer, who had found the precise blend of structure and freedom that let his mind run. He sat in the 3rd row, 2nd seat near the window. He rarely participated verbally in class. The sensory load of 30 students in a small room was often a lot to manage, but he submitted work of extraordinary depth and precision. His peers knew he was different. Some were kind. A few were not. Most were simply indifferent in the way of middle schoolers everywhere, absorbed in their own dramas. Marcus had one real friend, a kid named Deshaun Carter, also 12, who lived 2 blocks away and had the kind of easy, undemanding friendship that never asked Marcus to be anything other than what he was. They played chess online together in the evenings and occasionally talked about basketball statistics, which Marcus could recite to 5 decimal places. This was the world, steady, imperfect, but safe. And then on the first day of the new school year, everything changed, because Jefferson Middle School got a new principal. His name was Harold Beckett. He arrived the way certain men arrive at positions of authority, with a briefcase in one hand, a mandate in the other, and a confidence so complete it had long since stopped questioning itself. Beckett was 54 years old, tall, with a precisely knotted tie, and the kind of firm handshake that he'd clearly practiced in front of a mirror. He'd spent the last 8 years as assistant principal at a predominantly white suburban school district 40 minutes north of Crestwood, and before that, 12 years as a district administrator where, by all accounts, he had been efficient, organized, and entirely unremarkable. The Crestwood district had hired him because they wanted, as the board chair put it, someone who could bring structure. What that meant in practice became clearer in Beckett's first week. He walked the hallways with a clipboard. He sat in on classes unannounced. He held a staff meeting on his 3rd day and presented a 40-slide PowerPoint titled Streamlining for Success that included, among other things, a proposal to consolidate the special education support programs to maximize resource efficiency. Ms. Aucaffer had sat in the back of that staff meeting with her arms folded and her face very, very still. Marcus met Principal Beckett on a Wednesday. He hadn't been looking for the meeting. He'd been doing what he always did at 8:02 a.m. Walking to his locker, pressing his fingertips together, counting the floor tiles in the hallway, a habit that helped him regulate when the noise level was high. Beckett saw him and stopped. "Son," he said, in the particular tone of a man who uses the word son as a tool rather than a term of affection, "are you lost?" Marcus looked up. He processed the question. "No," he said. "You're walking very slowly, and you're—" Beckett made a vague gesture toward Marcus's hands, the pressing of fingertips. "What's that?" "I'm counting," Marcus said simply. Beckett looked at him for a moment, and something moved across his face, not malice, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something like dismissal made comfortable with itself. "What class are you in?" "Ms. Aucaffer's math, 2nd period." Beckett checked his clipboard. He found Marcus's name. He saw the notation IEP ASD. His expression shifted in a way that was small but unmistakable, a micro-adjustment in the architecture of his face that said, "Oh, one of those." "Well," he said, "get moving. And walk properly." He moved on down the hallway, already looking at his clipboard again. Marcus watched him go. He wasn't angry, he wasn't sure yet what he felt. He pressed his fingertips together twice more and continued to his locker. But here's the thing about that moment, the thing nobody knew. In that brief hallway exchange, Marcus had already noticed 3 things about Harold Beckett. The way his shoulders carried tension that his posture was trying to hide. The fact that the documents on his clipboard were printed in 11-point font, but Beckett held it at arm's length, suggesting he needed reading glasses he wasn't wearing. And the small gold pin on his lapel, a pin Marcus recognized from somewhere he couldn't quite place yet. He would place it later. What seemed like a small detail would become the key to everything. The first formal incident happened 2 weeks after that hallway meeting. Beckett had begun his Streamlining for Success initiative in earnest. And one of its first concrete actions was a review of every student receiving what he called supplemental services, which was a bureaucratic way of saying he was looking at every IEP. Ms. Aucaffer got the email on a Thursday afternoon. It requested a meeting to discuss, as Beckett phrased it, the appropriate academic placement for Marcus Williams. She read it twice, printed it, and placed it in a folder. Then she called Nana Rose. Nana Rose arrived at the school the following Tuesday in her church clothes, not because it was a church day, but because she believed that when you walked into a battle, You dressed accordingly. A deep burgundy blazer, her pearl earrings, the posture of a woman who had survived everything. Beckett's office smelled like new carpet and coffee. He sat behind his desk with the manner of a man who found the arrangement of furniture, himself elevated, visitors seated lower, naturally comfortable. Okafor sat to Nana Rose's right, her reading glasses on her chain, her hands in her lap, her face unreadable. "Mrs. Williams," Beckett began, he said Mrs. When it was Ms. and both women noticed, "Thank you for coming in. I've been reviewing Marcus's file and I have some concerns I'd like to share." "I'm listening," Nana Rose said. "Marcus is in Ms. Okafor's advanced math track, and I've been looking at his test scores alongside his profile, and I'm wondering if we've placed him in the right environment. The advanced track moves quickly, and I want to make sure Marcus isn't in a situation where he's being set up for frustration." There was a silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Mr. Beckett," Ms. Okafor said, her voice level and precise, "Marcus is the highest performing student in my advanced class." Beckett turned to her with a patient smile, the kind of smile that isn't listening. "I understand your affection for Marcus, Patricia," Ms. Okafor, a beat. "Ms. Okafor, but I think we need to look at this holistically. The social-emotional demands of a competitive academic environment, combined with his challenges. I just want to make sure we're being realistic." Nana Rose set her hands on the desk. "Very gently, very deliberately. What exactly are you suggesting for my grandson? There's an excellent resource room program, much smaller class size, more individualized. Marcus has individualized support already," Ms. Okafor said. "That's what his IEP provides for in the general education setting." "I'm suggesting," Beckett said, and his patience was thinning now like ice in spring, "that perhaps his IEP needs to be revisited. That perhaps a more contained environment. He scored a 99 on the district math assessment," Nana Rose said. 99 out of 100. Beckett paused. "Yes, well. Standardized assessments don't always capture the full picture." "What picture?" Nana Rose said quietly. "Are you looking at?" The meeting ended inconclusively. No changes were made, Ms. Okafor had made sure of that. But as Nana Rose walked out of the school that Tuesday afternoon, the autumn air on her face, she felt something she didn't say out loud. Felt it in her chest, the way you feel a storm before it arrives. This was not over, she was right. Over the following 3 weeks, Beckett made a series of moves that individually could each be explained away. Collectively, they formed a pattern. He dropped in on Ms. Okafor's class twice, unannounced, clipboard in hand, and both times positioned himself in the back corner near Marcus's seat, watching. Marcus was aware of him. The watching made the numbers harder to reach, made the room feel smaller. On both occasions, Marcus's output for that class period dropped, not because he couldn't do the work, but because being observed by someone who saw him as a problem required an expenditure of cognitive energy that math was supposed to be free from. The second incident came during a school-wide assembly. Beckett had instituted what he called weekly achievement spotlights, students called to the front to answer questions in their area of study. It was meant, he said, to build school culture. What it did in practice was create a stage, and Beckett controlled who got cast. Marcus was not on the original list. But a student dropped out sick, and a teacher suggested Marcus as a last-minute replacement. Beckett agreed, and something in the way he agreed, the slight pause, the careful smile, told me. Okafor this had the feeling of a setup. She was in the third row of the auditorium when it happened. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Marcus stood at the front of the room in his white t-shirt and navy sneakers, 400 students behind him. The fluorescent lights overhead casting that particular institutional brightness that makes everything look just slightly too exposed. He wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking at a spot on the wall, a technique he used when too many faces felt like too much incoming information. Beckett stood to his side with a microphone. "Marcus is one of our 7th graders," he announced, "and we're told he's quite good with numbers." He smiled at the audience, friendly, avuncular. The smile of a man who knew something the audience didn't. "So, Marcus, I'm going to ask you a few math questions, just basic ones to start." "What's 12 times 12? 144, Marcus said before Beckett had fully finished the sentence. A few students laughed supportively. Beckett nodded. "Good." Now what's 144 divided by 12? 12. Okay, now, Beckett paused, reached into his jacket pocket, produced a small note card. He'd prepared something. What is? What is 347 divided by 19? This was not basic arithmetic. The number wasn't clean. It had a remainder. The auditorium got a little quieter. Marcus pressed his fingertips together, once, twice. His eyes moved to the upper right, a gesture Ms. Autistic knew meant he was running a calculation. 5 seconds, 6, 7. 18.263157. He began, the digits falling out of him in a steady, even stream. 8947368. Beckett laughed. He actually laughed. Not with discomfort, not with surprise. With amusement, the specific amusement of a man watching something he found both pathetic and entertaining. He held his hand up, interrupting Marcus mid-decimal, and turned to the audience with a broad smile. Okay, that's a lot of numbers. I think we'll take your word for it. More laughter from the crowd, uncertain now, mixed. Some students laughed because their principal was laughing, and the social pressure of 400 peers is immense. Some students did not laugh and looked uncomfortable. One student, a girl in the second row named Amara, turned to her friend and whispered, "Why is he being like that?" Marcus stopped speaking. He looked at Beckett. And in Marcus's face there was something that was not anger, not humiliation. It was something quieter and more complete than either. It was the expression of a boy who had just received and filed a data point that confirmed something he'd already suspected about this man. He walked back to his seat. Ms. Autistic watched him come. She watched his posture, straight, steady, unhurried. She watched him sit down, press his fingertips together, and stare at the wall in front of him. Her throat tightened. What Beckett didn't know was that in Marcus's mind, he had already continued the calculation. The answer was 18.2631578947368842, repeating, a complete decimal expansion. And he had been 3/4 of the way through reciting it when the laughter stopped him. That night, at the kitchen table, Marcus ate dinner without speaking. After the dishes, he opened his binder. He worked on his sequences for 2 hours, at 9:47 p.m. Not his usual bedtime, but he couldn't sleep. He came to the kitchen door where Nana Rose was watching her evening program and said, in his flat, certain voice, "Nana." Today was a good day. Nana Rose looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Yes, it was, baby." She said it the way she always said it, as agreement and as promise both. But her hands, resting in her lap, were not still. But what Marcus couldn't have known, what nobody in that auditorium knew, was that someone in the back row had been recording on their phone. Not the full assembly, just the moment of laughter, just Beckett's face as he interrupted Marcus and turned to the crowd with that smile. Just 18 seconds. The video sat on a phone for 3 weeks before anything happened with it. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but it moves. October arrived with gray skies, and a meeting that Nana Rose had not been invited to. Beckett had convened what he called a student support review, technically within his administrative authority, technically not requiring parent notification at the preliminary stage. He invited Ms. Autistic because he had to. He invited the school psychologist, Dr. Renata Webb, because optics required it. He did not invite the behavioral coordinator, Mr. Davis, because Mr. Davis had a way of citing federal education law with the calm precision of a man who had memorized it on purpose, and Beckett found him difficult. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. In it, Beckett proposed that Marcus's IEP be formally revised to recommend a specialized learning environment for core subjects, meaning removal from Ms. Autistic's class. He used words like appropriate and realistic expectations and individualized pacing. He used the word disruptive once, which caused Dr. Webb to look up from her notepad with an expression that was extremely controlled. "Has Marcus been disruptive?" Dr. Webb asked. Not overtly, but in what way specifically? Beckett's pen tapped the table twice. The advanced class has certain social dynamics. I want to make sure Marcus isn't being placed in situations that create social-emotional strain. His social-emotional assessments are within functional range for a student with his profile, Dr. Webb said evenly. "I'm looking at the full picture." Ms. Autistic, who had been silent for most of the meeting, a strategic watching silence, said, "With respect, Mr. Beckett, what you're proposing is a significant change to Marcus's placement without evidence of academic underperformance, behavioral concerns, or a recommendation from his current support team. I'd like to understand the basis. Beckett looked at her. The basis is my professional judgment. Your professional judgment that a student performing in the 99th percentile belongs in a pull-out program. The room got very quiet. I'll be scheduling a formal IEP meeting, Beckett said. With the family present, we'll address all concerns at that time. Ms. Acaffer walked out of that meeting, down the hallway, into the women's restroom, and stood at the sink with both hands on the cold porcelain for a full 60 seconds. She looked at herself in the mirror. She thought about Marcus at that assembly. She thought about Nana Rose in her burgundy blazer. She thought about the 18-page email she was going to write tonight. Then she dried her hands, fixed her glasses, and walked back to her classroom, because her students needed her, including the one who was currently, in third period, sitting at his desk and factoring a 5-digit prime number for the pleasure of it. The formal IEP meeting was scheduled for the first Thursday in November. In the weeks leading up to it, the situation at school had developed a kind of terrible momentum. Word had gotten around the staff, in the careful, sideways way that information moves in institutions, that Beckett was pushing to remove Marcus from advanced math. The responses varied. 2 teachers expressed quiet support to Ms. Acaffer. One vice principal, a man named Garrett who had been at Jefferson for 16 years, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. An administrative assistant named Mrs. Tran began paying close, careful attention to which documents crossed her desk. Marcus noticed the change in atmosphere the way he noticed everything, precisely, without necessarily understanding the social context behind it, but logging the data nonetheless. Teachers smiled at him with a different quality now. Some looked away. The hallway somehow had more eyes. He didn't say anything about it. He went to class, he ate lunch, he played chess with Deshawn. He counted things. But at night, the sequences in his binders got more complex, more ambitious. The way a person under pressure unconsciously retreats to the thing that makes them most completely themselves. And one evening, when Nana Rose came to check on him at midnight and found him still working, filling a page with a proof that made no immediate sense to her but had a kind of visual beauty in its architecture, she sat down across from him and said, very gently, "Marcus, how are you doing?" He pressed his fingertips together. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. "I am processing a situation," he said finally. "What kind of situation?" "A fairness problem," he said. "I am trying to determine the correct response." Nana Rose looked at her grandson, this boy, this miraculous, specific, irreplaceable boy, and she felt something climb up her throat that she would not let become tears because Marcus found other people's distress difficult to navigate, and it wasn't his job to manage. Hers. "You just keep being yourself, baby," she said. "That's always the right response." He thought about this for a moment. "That's not a falsifiable statement," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it's true." The all seems lost moment came on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days before the IEP meeting, in the form of a piece of paper. Beckett had distributed a memo to the whole staff, not just the meeting participants, outlining his vision for inclusive excellence at Jefferson. It contained 4 paragraphs of education policy language and 1 concrete proposal: the conversion of the current resource room into a learning achievement center that would serve as the primary academic environment for all students with IEPs. Not a supplement, a replacement. If it went through, Marcus would no longer be in Ms. Acaffer's class. He would be separated, tracked, quietly removed from the academic pipeline that his abilities had earned him the right to be in. And because Beckett was careful, because he'd chosen his language precisely, because he'd framed it as support rather than restriction, it was difficult to fight directly. The memo was 3 pages of plausible deniability. Ms. Acaffer sat at her desk after school and read it 3 times. Then she picked up the phone and called Dr. Lydia Chambers at the university. "Lydia," she said, "I need to talk to you about Marcus Williams, and I think it might be time." There was a pause on the other end. "You mean?" "Yes," Ms. Acaffer said. "I think it's time." What they meant by time, that would become clear. But not yet, not yet. The days before the IEP meeting had a peculiar quality, the way the air gets before weather. Things were happening that nobody had fully connected yet. Item 1. Mrs. Tran, the administrative assistant, had been quietly organizing documents, not doing anything with them yet, just organizing. She was 53 years old, had worked at Jefferson for 21 years, and had a memory for institutional detail that was, in its own way, not unlike Marcus's. She remembered every IEP meeting, every placement decision. And she had noticed, she hadn't said anything about noticing, but she had noticed, that of the 7 students Beckett had reviewed for placement revision in his first 2 months. All 7 were students of color. 6 were black, 3 had IEPs. She filed this information carefully in the part of her brain she used for things that mattered. Item 2. The 18-second video on the phone of a student named Jordan Washington, a 9th grader who had been in the auditorium that day, who had been in the back row, who had pressed record almost instinctively when Beckett laughed, had been sent to 3 friends. Privately, not posted anywhere, not yet. Jordan hadn't known what to do with it, but it existed. Clear in focus, unmistakable, Beckett's face as he laughed at Marcus, as he waved his hand dismissively as he turned to the audience to share the joke. 18 seconds. Item 3. Dr. Lydia Chambers, professor of mathematical cognition at Ohio State University's Extension campus, had been making calls of her own. Quiet calls. She'd spoken with 2 colleagues. She'd made a call to the national office of the Mathematical Olympiad program. She drafted a letter that she had not yet sent. Item 4, and this one is important, so pay attention. The gold pin on Beckett's lapel, the one Marcus had noticed on that first morning in the hallway. Marcus had placed it 2 weeks later. It was the pin of the Regional Superintendent's Council, a district leadership organization that met quarterly and whose membership was publicly listed. Beckett was not just a new principal. He was a man with larger ambitions and a carefully constructed profile. His streamlining for success initiative was documented, publicly cited in district materials. What he did at Jefferson, how he performed, was visible to the people who made decisions about careers like his. This detail would matter more than anyone knew. The IEP meeting happened on a Thursday morning. The cast of this meeting, Beckett at the head of the table, Ms. Aucaffer to his left, Dr. Renata Webb, the psychologist, across from her. A district special education coordinator named Mr. Pulliam, who had driven 40 minutes to be there. And at the other end of the table, facing Beckett directly, Nana Rose. Marcus was not in the room. IEP meetings at Jefferson were typically held without the student unless the student specifically requested to attend. And Nana Rose had made the decision that Marcus didn't need to sit in a room and be discussed like a problem to be solved. Beckett had brought revised IEP paperwork, already drafted, already reflecting the changes he wanted. Nana Rose looked at the papers and then looked at Beckett with an expression that was the verbal equivalent of no. "I don't see the academic data that supports this change, Mr. Pulliam said, turning pages with the practiced neutrality of a bureaucrat who has learned to hide his reactions. "The recommendation is based on holistic assessment," Beckett said. "Can you quantify that?" Ms. Aucaffer asked. Beckett moved forward with his approach the way a man moves forward when he's decided to be unyielding. He talked about appropriate challenge levels. He talked about social-emotional wellness. He talked about realistic academic trajectories, and this phrase, realistic academic trajectories, landed in the room with a weight that was not ambiguous. Nana Rose leaned forward very slightly. "Mr. Beckett," she said, "my grandson has been academically successful in his current placement. He has not been disruptive. He has not requested a change. His teachers have not recommended a change. You are proposing to alter his education based on a judgment about what is realistic for him. I need you to explain to me very specifically what information is informing that judgment." Beckett looked at her. His profile includes a 99th percentile math score and a documented gift for advanced mathematical reasoning. "Which part of that profile concerns you?" The silence lasted longer than was comfortable. Mr. Pulliam was writing. Dr. Webb was watching. Ms. Aucaffer was very still. Beckett recovered smoothly. He was practiced at this, and redirected the conversation to procedural logistics. The meeting ended without a change to Marcus's placement, but with Beckett's proposal officially on the table, pending a 30-day review period. 30 days. After the meeting in the parking lot, Ms. Acaffer caught up with Mr. Pulliam. "David," she said, using his first name the way you do with someone you've known professionally for a long time, "do you see what's happening here?" He looked at her for a moment. He was careful. Institutional, but his eyes said something his words stayed just short of. "Patricia," he said, "if you're planning to do something, you might want to do it before the review period ends." He got in his car. Ms. Acaffer stood in the parking lot with the November wind at her back. She took out her phone and sent 3 texts, one to Dr. Chambers, one to Mrs. Tran, one to a journalist named Keisha Montague who covered education for the Crestwood Gazette, who Ms. Acaffer had met at a community forum 2 years ago, who had given her a card and said, "If you ever see something, please call me." And then the letter arrived. It came to the school addressed to Principal Beckett, with a university insignia in the upper left corner. It came on a Tuesday, exactly 9 weeks after that first hallway meeting. Mrs. Tran received it, logged it as incoming correspondence, and placed it in Beckett's inbox. Beckett read it. Ms. Acaffer would learn its contents later, but here is what it said in the careful and precise language of academia. It was a formal letter from the Department of Mathematics at Ohio State University regarding a student, unnamed in the letter, identified only by a competition registration number, who had placed second in the National Junior Mathematical Olympiad that passed July. The letter was a follow-up to an earlier correspondence, and it was requesting confirmation of the student's current enrollment status and academic placement, specifically noting that the university's Mathematics Excellence Partnership Program wished to formally recognize the student and discuss potential academic support options going forward. Beckett read the letter. He did not immediately connect the competition registration number to any student in his building. Why would he? He had only been at Jefferson for 2 months. He had spent those 2 months looking at files, looking at labels, looking at notations. He had not spent them actually getting to know the children. He forwarded the letter to the district records office with a note, "Please advise." He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea. But somewhere on the other side of the building, in room 114, Marcus Jerome Williams was sitting at his desk by the window, pressing his fingertips together, completing a proof that his teacher had called remarkable and that a professor 40 miles away had described as publishable with minor revision. He was not thinking about the letter. He didn't know about the letter. He was thinking about a sequence, a specific kind of number sequence he'd been developing for 4 months, one that he had a feeling, a deep and certain feeling, was going to do something extraordinary when he reached the end of it. He was 12 years old. He was, by every measure that mattered, exactly where he was supposed to be. But the storm was coming. And it was coming in the form of a single event that Principal Harold Beckett had organized himself, blissfully, fatally unaware of what he had set in motion. The event was called the Jefferson Winter Academic Showcase. Beckett had created it, another piece of his school culture initiative, as an evening where students demonstrated academic achievement for parents, community members, and not incidentally. District leadership. The superintendent, Dr. Carolyn Marsh, had confirmed her attendance. 3 school board members would be there. A photographer from the Crestwood Gazette had been invited. The showcase was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the 2nd week of December. The auditorium would be set up with display tables, a presentation stage, and a panel of community judges. There would be a math challenge segment in which student volunteers could participate in a live problem-solving demonstration. Beckett had designed the program himself. He was proud of it. It was exactly the kind of high-visibility event that looked excellent on a principal's professional record. He had not, in designing the math challenge segment, thought to check who might volunteer. He had not anticipated that Ms. Acaffer would spend 2 weeks quietly, patiently, caringly preparing a student, specifically preparing Marcus, to be ready if Marcus chose to participate, not pushing. Just preparing, asking Marcus if he would like to share what he could do, explaining in simple, honest terms that there would be people in the room who needed to see it. Marcus had thought about this for 3 days. He had asked Nana Rose about it on a Sunday evening. "Should I show them?" he asked. "The numbers." Nana Rose had been quiet for a moment. "Then, baby, you've been showing people the numbers your whole life. This time you're just going to make sure they're looking." Marcus had processed this. "Okay," he said. The night of the showcase arrived cold and clear. The auditorium filled up, parents in winter coats, students in their best clothes. Community members who'd come because they cared about this school, this neighborhood, these children. Dr. Carolyn Marsh, the superintendent, was seated in the third row. A serious, composed woman in her 50s, with a reputation for attention to detail and zero tolerance for administrative nonsense. The 3 board members sat near her. At a side table, a journalist, Keisha Montague of the Crestwood Gazette, her press badge on, her recorder in her bag, was writing preliminary notes. Mrs. Tran was there. She had brought a folder. Dr. Lydia Chambers from Ohio State had driven down. She sat in the 6th row in a good coat with a plain manila envelope on her lap. Deshaun Carter was in the 4th row with his mother, who had taken off work to come because Deshaun had told her something was going to happen tonight, and she wasn't sure what. But she trusted her son's instincts. Ms. Aucaffer was in the front left corner, her reading glasses on, her hands in her lap. Her face composed in that particular way of hers, the way of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and is now watching the clock. Beckett opened the showcase at 7 p.m. He was excellent at this, the warmth of a man performing public goodwill. He thanked the community. He praised the district. He spoke about Jefferson's new direction. He looked objectively like a successful principal at the peak of his powers. The presentation tables were visited. Students showed projects. Parents admired. The program moved along. Then came the math challenge segment. "We have several of our talented math students who have volunteered to demonstrate their skills tonight," Beckett announced, smile in place. He looked down at his program. He read 4 names. The 4th was Marcus Williams. Something shifted in the room when Marcus's name was read, subtle, like a change in air pressure. Several teachers exchanged glances. Dr. Marsh looked up from her program. 3 students went before Marcus. They solved problems competently, received applause, returned to their seats. The problems were 7th grade level, order of operations, basic algebra, appropriate, fine. And then something happened that nobody had planned for. As Marcus's name was called, and he rose from his seat, a woman in the 6th row shifted forward almost imperceptibly. She opened the manila envelope in her lap, just slightly, not removing anything yet, just checking, the way a person checks a tool before they need to use it. Her name was Dr. Lydia Chambers, and in 18 months of working with Marcus, she had never attended a school event. Tonight, she had driven 40 miles on a cold December evening without being asked to. Beckett at his podium did not notice her. He was scanning his notes for the problem he'd prepared for Marcus. The simple one, the appropriate one, the realistic one. He did not notice the woman in the 6th row. He did not notice Mrs. Tran's folder. He did not notice the journalist's recorder or the superintendent's attentive stillness, or the way 3 teachers in the left section were watching Marcus walk to the stage with an expression that was not casual interest, but something much older and much more protective. He noticed none of it. That was his first mistake of the evening. The last one would be worse. Marcus walked to the front of the room. He wore his white t-shirt and navy sneakers. He pressed his fingertips together once, looked at the spot on the wall he used when faces were too much, and waited. Beckett had prepared the problems. He'd prepared different levels for different students. For Marcus, he had prepared, deliberately with a smile in his heart, something he considered appropriately simple. A safety net. A kindness, he would have told you. "I'm being realistic about what this boy can handle." "All right, Marcus," Beckett said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth. "Let's start with something straightforward. Tell me, what is 423 multiplied by?" "I would like to try a different problem," Marcus said. The room got very quiet. Beckett blinked. "I'm sorry. I would like to try a different problem," Marcus said again, his voice even, neither aggressive nor apologetic, just honest. "I have one." He reached into the pocket of his jeans and produced a folded piece of paper. On it, he had written a problem he had constructed himself this week, specifically for tonight. He unfolded it and he read it aloud. It was not a seventh-grade problem. It was not, for that matter, a high school problem. It was a problem involving a multivariable polynomial expression with constraints that required the application of principles from number theory, the kind of problem that appears in undergraduate mathematics coursework or in Olympiad competitions. The room was silent for a full second. Then a sound began, not applause, not yet, just a kind of collective intake of breath, a shift in the quality of the silence. Beckett looked at Marcus with an expression that was trying to find itself. He looked at his program. He looked back at Marcus. He began to form the beginning of a smile, the smile he used when he needed to manage a situation. And he said, "Marcus, that's quite a complicated." And he gave a small laugh. Beginning to turn toward the audience, beginning to do what he'd done in September, beginning to make it a moment for himself. The answer is -42/7. Which reduces to -6, Marcus said. Flat, certain, complete, and then he said, "Would you like me to show the work?" The silence after Marcus's answer had a different quality than the silence before it. Doctor. Lydia Chambers in the 6th row had her hand over her mouth. Deshaun Carter's mother was gripping her son's arm without knowing she was doing it. Ms. Acaffer was perfectly still. Beckett's smile had not completed itself. It had stopped mid-formation like a clock whose battery has just died. His eyes moved from Marcus to the paper to Marcus again. He began. "The answer is correct," said a voice from the 6th row. Dr. Chambers stood up. She was not a woman who announced herself. She was a mathematician, measured, evidence-based, economical with her words. But when she rose from that 6th row seat, and the room shifted to look at her, the certainty in her posture was something that could not be manufactured or performed. It came from knowing exactly what she was carrying in that envelope, and knowing exactly what it meant. And having driven 40 miles in the cold, to make sure that the right people heard it said out loud. "I'm Dr. Lydia Chambers," she said, addressing the room. "I'm a professor of mathematical cognition at Ohio State University. I've had the privilege of working with Marcus Williams for the past 18 months, and I would like, with your permission, Superintendent Marsh, to share something with everyone here tonight." Doctor. Marsh in the 3rd row said, "Please, go ahead." Dr. Chambers walked to the front of the room. She opened the manila envelope. She removed a single document. She turned to face the audience, and then, deliberately, she turned slightly to face Beckett. "This," she said, holding up the document, "is the official results notification from the National Junior Mathematical Olympiad program. This year's competition drew 2,412 participants from 43 states. The top 15 finalists competed in the national round this past July." She paused. She let the room breathe. She let every person in that auditorium lean forward 1 inch. "Marcus Jerome Williams placed second in the nation." "Second in the nation," she said again, letting those 4 words fill every corner of that room, settle into the rafters, reach the back wall. Find every pair of ears. "He is, to my knowledge, and based on extensive assessment, among the top 5 mathematical minds of his age group currently active in the United States. He has developed original theoretical work, original meaning work that has not been published elsewhere, that my colleagues at Ohio State consider to be publishable. He is 12 years old. He is autistic. He is a student at this school." She looked at Beckett. Her voice did not change. "He is, or was until recently, enrolled in your advanced mathematics track." The room erupted in something that was not quite applause and not quite shock. It was the sound of 400 people absorbing a reality that was rewriting itself in real time. Parents turned to each other. Students sat up straighter. Teachers in the left section, the ones who had been watching Marcus, walked to the stage with that protective expression. Some of them had closed their eyes briefly. The way you close your eyes when something you were waiting for finally arrives. Beckett was standing at his podium. His face had gone very still. His hands, the hands that had waved dismissively in September, that had signed the placement review papers, that had prepared the simple problem for the boy he'd considered a matter of realistic expectation management. His hands were at his sides. And the color had left his face with the quiet efficiency of water leaving a bathtub. He had not known. That was the thing. He had not known, had not taken the time, had not done the due diligence. had not considered for even one moment. That the boy he'd been trying to quietly remove from the academic track was a nationally ranked prodigy. That the boy he'd laughed at in the assembly was running decimal expansions that went on for pages. That the boy whose IEP he'd treated as a ceiling was working in his binders on mathematics that grown professors found remarkable. He had not known because he had not looked. Because he had decided from the first moment in that hallway what Marcus was. And once you've decided what someone is, you stop gathering evidence. Superintendent Dr. Carolyn Marsh stood up. She was not a woman who made a lot of visible emotional decisions, but she stood up, and she walked toward the front of the room, and she extended her hand to Marcus Williams, 12 years old. 4 feet 10 inches, white t-shirt, navy sneakers. Marcus, she said, on behalf of the Crestwood School District, I want you to know how proud we are of you. Marcus shook her hand. He pressed his fingertips together once. He looked at the spot on the wall. Thank you, he said. I just like the numbers. In the 4th row, Deshaun Carter was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands had gone red. In the front corner, Ms. Patricia Aucaffer had taken off her reading glasses, and her eyes were bright. And she was smiling the smile of a woman who has been patient for a long time, and has just watched that patience become exactly what it needed to be. In the far back of the room, Nana Rose Williams, who had arrived late, who had slipped in quietly during the showcase and stood against the back wall in her burgundy blazer and pearl earrings, had both hands pressed flat against her chest, over her heart. She was not crying, she was just breathing, just being, the steady, immovable fact of herself. And then Mrs. Tran, who had been sitting quietly in the 2nd row with her folder, stood up, and she walked to where Superintendent Marsh was standing, and she said very quietly, Dr. Marsh. There's something else you should see. She opened the folder. Inside were the documented records of 7 students, all students of color, all with IEPs, whose placements Beckett had moved to alter or had altered in his first 2 months at Jefferson. The dates, the decisions, the pattern. Dr. Marsh read the first page. She read it with the expression of a person reading something that is confirming what they were already beginning to suspect. She looked up from the folder. She looked at Beckett. And Harold Beckett, who had spent 23 years constructing a version of himself that stood behind authority and behind procedure, and behind the language of institutional care, met the eyes of the superintendent of the district he had just arrived in, and he had nothing left to put between himself and what he had done. Silence, complete, absolute silence. The aftermath of that Tuesday evening did not unfold like a movie all at once, in a single dramatic sweep. Real consequences in institutions move through channels, through documentation, through investigation. But they moved. Harold Beckett was placed on administrative leave before the week was out. The district opened a formal investigation into the placement decisions he had made in his 2 months at Jefferson, specifically examining whether his pattern of IEP revisions constituted a violation of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and whether it rose to the level of discriminatory practice under federal education law. The Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education was notified. An outside equity consultant was brought in. It took 4 months. At the end of those 4 months, the investigation found that Beckett had engaged in a documented pattern of removing students of color with disabilities from inclusive academic settings without sufficient educational justification. The report used careful language, as these reports do, but the finding was unambiguous. Harold Beckett resigned before the formal termination proceeding concluded. He issued a written apology to the district that said all the procedurally correct things and nothing from the actual territory of his heart. His name was removed from the Regional Superintendent's Council membership list. The gold pin on his lapel, that small detail, that had been the key to everything. The 18-second video, Jordan Washington had finally posted it the night of the showcase, with a single line of caption. He laughed at him. By the following morning, it had been seen by 40,000 people. By the end of the week, it was 160,000. The comments were the kind that make you believe, briefly, that the internet has a conscience. Keisha Montague's story in the Crestwood Gazette was picked up by 3 regional outlets and 1 national education publication. The headline read, The student a principal called Unrealistic was a National Math Olympiad finalist. Ms. Patricia Aucaffer was named Interim Academic Department Chair, a role that several people noted she should have been offered years ago. She accepted it the way she accepted everything, without ceremony, without fanfare, in a single brief email that ended with 3 words. There is work. Her first act as department chair was to propose a district-wide review of IEP placement practices. Her second was to update Marcus's academic file. Dr. Renata Webb submitted a formal complaint to the district, citing the student support review meeting she had attended, which she described as procedurally irregular and philosophically inconsistent with evidence-based special education practice. Mr. Davis, the behavioral support coordinator, who Beckett had excluded from the review meeting, returned to it with quiet satisfaction and a memorized passage of federal education law that he didn't need to use, because the people who needed to hear it already had. And Mr. Pulliam, the district coordinator who had stood in that parking lot and said, if you're planning to do something, do it before the review period ends, he sent Ms. Aucaffer an email that said only, well done. For Marcus, the changes were less institutional and more human, which is to say, more real. He remained in Ms. Aucaffer's class. His IEP remained intact, strengthened, actually, updated to formally recognize his mathematical giftedness as a component of his profile. Something that had always been true, but had never been written down in the official language. Dr. Chambers formalized a university partnership that would allow Marcus to take advanced coursework as a remote learner alongside his regular school schedule. The Mathematical Olympiad program sent a letter, a formal one, on headed paper. That was given to Nana Rose in a meeting attended by the new interim principal, the superintendent, and Ms. Aucaffer. There were photographs taken that day. In one of them, Marcus is standing between Nana Rose and Ms. Aucaffer, a certificate in his hands, looking not at the camera but at a point slightly to the left, his neutral resting posture. The gaze that people who didn't know him sometimes misread as inattention, but which Ms. Aucaffer knew as the expression of a mind that was always working. In another, he is looking at the certificate itself. And on his face, subtle, easily missed if you weren't looking, is the small, precise, private smile of a boy who understands that numbers always, eventually, tell the truth. Nana Rose framed both photographs. They went on the wall next to the bookshelves, next to the 14 color-coded binders, next to the gap in the curtains where the autumn light came through at 6:17 every morning. And that night at 9:52 p.m., Marcus came to the kitchen door where Nana Rose was watching her evening program, and he said, in his flat, certain voice, the voice he used for things he meant completely, Nana. Today was a good day. She looked at him for a long moment. Baby, she said, today was the best kind of good day, the kind that was always true. This story is about a lot of things. It's about a boy who loved numbers the way some people love poetry or music, deeply, privately, with his whole self. It's about a grandmother who understood that protecting someone's dignity is sometimes the most radical act of love available to you. It's about a teacher who made a bet, not on what the world thought her student could do, but on what she had seen with her own eyes. But it's also about something harder to name. Something we circle around when we tell these stories. Harold Beckett was not a monster. He was, in many ways, entirely ordinary, a man whose assumptions were invisible to him, the way most assumptions are, because they had never been seriously challenged. He had learned, somewhere in 23 years of institutional life, to look at a certain kind of child and calculate, quickly, effortlessly, almost unconsciously, a ceiling. He didn't think of it as bias. He thought of it as realism. He thought of it as care. That is perhaps the most dangerous form of prejudice, not the kind that announces itself. The kind that wears the face of good intentions. And Marcus never raised his voice, never argued. Never revealed his hand ahead of time, not because he was being strategic. Marcus didn't think that way, but because he was simply, completely, entirely himself, in every hallway encounter. In every moment when the laughter of an auditorium suggested that his mind was something to be managed rather than celebrated. In every night at the kitchen table when the numbers were his company and his comfort and his truest language. He didn't fight back by becoming something different. He fought back by being exactly what he already was. There is something worth sitting within that. The world has a long history of deciding. Before the evidence is in, before the question has been asked, before the child has had a chance to answer, what certain people are capable of. What is realistic for them? What ceiling they should be happy with? And every now and then, a 12-year-old boy sits down at a table in a public auditorium and answers a question that wasn't meant for him, and the ceiling becomes a floor. That's not just a math story, that's a human story. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself holding your breath at any point, or sitting a little more upright, or thinking about a child you know who carries something extraordinary that the world hasn't figured out how to see yet, then you know why these stories matter. They matter because dignity is not contingent on credentials. They matter because ability doesn't announce itself on schedule. They matter because the children who are hardest to categorize are sometimes the ones carrying the most light. If stories like this remind you that truth has a way of finding daylight, I'd be honored to have you subscribe. Because there are more of these stories. There will always be more of these stories. And they deserve to be told with the care they require. But I'll tell you this, Marcus's story, as remarkable as it was, is not the most jaw-dropping thing I've found this month. Because what happened when a single black woman walked into a corporate boardroom full of executives who had already written her off, walked in with nothing but a legal pad and 4 years of quiet, patient observation, and dismantled an entire power structure in 45 minutes flat, that story. That one's going to stay with you for a very long time. Until next time, take care of each other and count the things that matter.